The parrot would not stop screaming at the nursery door. They thought she was jealous of the new baby. She was trying to save her. Cleo was a 6-year-old African grey parrot who had lived in the Nakamura household on Birchwood Street since she was 8 weeks old. She was the kind of bird that people who kept African greys described as a family member. Opinionated, perceptive, capable of mimicking specific voices, aware of routine in a way that made her seem like she had a schedule. She was not a screamer. In 6 years, Marcus and Diane Nakamura had never once described her as difficult. Then, they brought home the nursery set. They had spent weeks selecting it. A matching crib and 6-drawer dresser, medium-density fiberboard construction, white finish, flat-packed, and assembled in the nursery over a weekend in the month before the baby was due. The room looked beautiful, clean white surfaces, the new mattress sealed in plastic until the last minute, a reading chair in the corner that had been in Diane's family. The window was left open for 2 days to air out the new smell, and by the time they declared it ready, neither of them could detect anything unusual. The room smelled like nothing. That was what they wanted. 4 days after baby Noah came home, they moved her from the bassinet in the master bedroom to the nursery. Cleo began screaming at 9:47 that night. She screamed from her perch in the living room where she always slept, directed at the hallway, directed at the closed nursery door. It was not her playful mimicry sound, and it was not her communication chirp, and it was not any sound Marcus had heard from her in 6 years. It was an alarm call, extended, urgent, directed. He went to the nursery door. He opened it. Noah was sleeping. He stood in the doorway for 30 seconds, breathing the air and smelling nothing unusual, and went back to the living room and told Cleo to be quiet. She stopped for about 20 minutes, and then began again. Diane came downstairs. She said what both of them were thinking. The bird is jealous. They had read about this. Companion animals sometimes struggled with the arrival of a new baby. Cleo had never had to share their attention before. This was an adjustment reaction, and it would settle. Diane covered Cleo's perch with a cloth, which usually quieted her. Cleo screamed through the cloth. Marcus put Cleo in the back room of the house, closed the door, went to bed. He lay in the dark listening to the distant, muffled screaming, and thought about calling the avian vet in the morning. At 2:04 a.m., he got up. He had not slept. The screaming had not stopped. He had spent 2 hours constructing, and then dismantling, and then reconstructing the explanation that this was jealousy and it would pass. And somewhere in the 3rd hour, the explanation had stopped holding. Something in the pattern of the sound was wrong. Not the frequency of jealousy, the frequency of something else. He brought Cleo out of the back room. She flew directly to the nursery door and screamed at it. He opened the nursery door. He stood in the doorway. This time he did not scan for a visible problem. He stood still and breathed slowly and paid attention. There was a smell, faint, sweet, slightly chemical, present below the threshold he had been checking against. The obvious new furniture smell he had verified was gone 2 days ago. This was something below that. Formaldehyde off-gassing from new MDF furniture products at normal indoor temperature in a room with the window closed against the cold November night was still occurring at a low rate. In an adult, it would be below detectable concern. In a room with a sleeping infant, in an unventilated space of 9 feet by 10 feet, across multiple nights, it was something else. Cleo's olfactory system is among the most sensitive of any bird species kept in captivity. African greys in the wild detect the volatile organic compounds of specific tree bark and fruiting cycles from significant distances. In a domestic setting, they respond to chemical compounds in the air that humans routinely fail to detect. She had been responding to the compound in the nursery for 4 hours. If you stay for stories about what animals sense before we do, you are in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Marcus opened the nursery window fully, moved Noah back to the bassinet in the master bedroom, and waited in the hall. Cleo flew to the doorway of the nursery, made 2 short sounds, and went quiet. The avian toxicologist Marcus called the following morning confirmed that formaldehyde off-gassing from medium-density fiberboard furniture was well documented. That African greys and several other bird species showed documented sensitivity to VOC concentrations at levels well below human detection. and that extended exposure for an infant in an enclosed environment was a legitimate concern that had been the subject of pediatric environmental health guidance. The nursery furniture was moved to the garage and aired for 3 weeks before being brought back into the house, with a low VOC sealant applied to all surfaces. The room was ventilated for 10 days with the window consistently open. When Noah was finally moved back in, Cleo sat quietly on her perch in the living room and made no sound at the nursery door. Has your parrot, dog, or other pet ever done something that you couldn't explain until it was the only thing that made sense? Tell us in the comments. These stories deserve to be heard. Dr. Amara Obi, pediatric environmental health specialist, told Diane at the follow-up, "We rarely catch formaldehyde exposure in nurseries before symptoms develop, because exposure is gradual and the symptoms in infants, respiratory irritation, sleep disruption, are easy to attribute to other causes. You caught this very early. How?" She said, "Our parrots screamed at the door until we opened it. Every guardian deserves to be recognized, even the ones who never ask for anything in return. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one." Cleo was still in the living room. She still has opinions about everything, about meal times and morning routines and the sound of the front door. But she has not screamed at the nursery door again. Noah is 9 months old now, and sometimes Diane brings her to the living room in the afternoon to sit near Cleo's perch, and Cleo watches the baby with the alert, evaluative stillness of a creature who made a decision about this child on her first night home, and has not revised it since. Tomorrow, a golden retriever who chose to sleep next to a newborn on day 1, and what he was really doing all those nights.